Hume was the last philosopher we learned about in lectures, and he provided to us a way of looking at knowledge that he believes, in some sense, says dismisses rationalism. For him, when we take a look at rationalism, the great things about rationalism are that you can get to necessary truths, truths that you know for sure, because what else is knowledge except stuff you know for sure? And he says, no. That stuff they know for sure is just relations of ideas. Those are just things that we defined as human beings. That's not knowledge of the world. If you want knowledge of the world, which he calls matters of fact, you know that only after experiencing it. So there are no necessary truths of the world. All the necessary truths are just stuff we made up. 1 + 1 = 2. A red ball has color. Sure, a red ball has color. That is a necessary truth, but you're not telling me anything new by saying a red ball has color. In order to know that there's a red ball in front of you, you had to see it, right? That's a matter of fact that you get after experience. The other big deal with rationalism was the fact that they could come to generalized knowledge, right? They can take some basic facts and then generalize and come to a generalized truth statement. Well, Hume points out, look, in order for the rationalists to make arguments where they learn something new, where you come to generalized truth statements, you have to begin with what you see in the first place. You have to begin with empirical knowledge, okay? So with Hume's fork, he believes he's put a fork into the rationalists. Now, when you hear or read about Hume's fork nowadays, you're not always going to see relations of ideas, matters of fact. What you'll more often see is the term analytic truths instead of relations of ideas. Okay, so circle that in your notes. Analytic. It's truth just by analyzing the words, right? A bachelor is an unmarried male. Sure, it's true, but it's only true because of the words and how you analyze bachelor. If you analyze the word, you know that a bachelor is an unmarried male. So you're not really learning anything about the world, says Hume. The term you'll hear for matters of fact nowadays is more often synthetic truths. Synthetic is that you're adding on to your knowledge, right? You're synthesizing based upon what you see, right? In this case, you have actual knowledge of the world. So you're synthesizing. You're not just looking at your definitions. You're synthesizing. You're putting together things, right, that you see, and then you come up with knowledge. So if you ever Google Hume's fork, you'll often hear it described as analytic versus synthetic. Now, keep in mind, too, that when Hume came up with this idea, he thought that relations of ideas came prior to experience, right, a priori, and all matters of fact came after experience, a posteriori. So for Hume, there's only those two types of truths, those two types of knowledge. Relations of ideas a priori, matters of fact a posteriori. These terms, the newer terms, analytic and synthetic, what's interesting to note is where they come from. Hume didn't make them up. They came from Kant, who I had you read today. So when we read the Critique of Pure Reason, the first Kant reading, what he does in that work is he tries to question what we could actually know, right? When we say metaphysics, we're talking about like actual reality, absolute reality. What could you actually know of absolute reality? Can we gain any knowledge of absolute reality? Both rationalists say you can through reason, and empiricists say you can through sense data. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant is going to take a look at this and say, well, is it really even possible to have absolute knowledge of something? And what he's going to come up with surprised a lot of people in one sense, but the way he addresses rationalism and empiricism, even though radical, might be common sense to you. Okay? So what we'll talk about are two things in the next 30, 40 minutes. One is Kant's compromise. It's a famous way of looking at Kant's philosophy. And two, Kant's Copernican revolution. Now, if you remember the Copernican revolution, the idea was that here we are living our lives thinking that everything revolves around us. And then Copernicus popularizes the idea that no, we are revolving or orbiting the sun. And that completely flipped the way we saw ourselves and our place in the universe, right? No longer were we the center of everything. And that just blew people's minds. Kant believes his idea of epistemology is going to blow people's minds to the point that it's going to change how we look at knowledge. Here is a possible midterm or final exam question. How does Kant use Hume's fork to address critiques of rationalism and then arrive at his own Copernican revolution, building from Locke's indirect philosophy? Wow, we're getting to some heavy philosophy terms now, right? Okay, well, let me help you unpack this so you can ace this if this was asked in the final. Kant's compromise. Here we are looking at Hume's fork again. But now we're going to use Kant's terms, right? Analytic truths, synthetic truths. So far, no big deal. Here is Kant's huge compromise. He says, look, you guys, rationalists, it is true, we have necessary truths, right? But it doesn't mean that we can't learn something from experience either. Hey, rationalists, hey, empiricists, it's true. It's true that we can learn something by our experience, but it doesn't mean we have a blank slate, right? Reason is there to allow us to make sense of the experience. So why don't we just all hold hands and admit that we need both reason and experience to gain knowledge? How many of you have, as you've been going through these lectures, go, why do we need to pick? Why can't we say we use both? Now, the reason why empiricists say you can't use both, or why it's not really accurate to say use both, is because of what we see Hume say. Hume's going to say, look, all the stuff that you say you get through reason, they're not truths about the world. I mean, that's the big rub. For the empiricists, they're going to say you need sensory data. I mean, even, yes, you take sensory data and then you make sense out of it, but that's still using empiricism. Empiricism is still the way to get knowledge. The reason why they're pushing back against the rationalists is because you can't get knowledge just by thinking about it. All of that knowledge is just stuff that we made up, right? That's why we have that divide. But Kant is going to say that's not necessarily true. He's going to say that I believe you actually can get knowledge from from reason. You can get knowledge from reason. So he's going to add another spoke to this. He's going to say there is knowledge of the world, right? Synthetic truths that you can get before experience. And now we can see, says Kant, that you can get knowledge through both thinking about it and through experience. This is the compromise, that you can, just by thinking, get knowledge of the world. It's not just stuff that we make up. Okay, so what sorts of knowledge can we get through just thinking? On your paper, in your notes, I want you to draw the following table. For Kant, he's going to say that synthetic knowledge is not always after experience. A priori knowledge you get prior to experience, can give you both synthetic and analytic knowledge. So remember, Hume and all the empiricists, they say, no. I think that if it's knowledge from, if it's knowledge of the world, it has to be after experience. And if it's coming before experience, then it's only stuff that you made up. Kant says that that's not true. It's not just two. Kant says there's three categories or classifications of judgments. Okay, so let's take a look what he's going to put in each of these boxes. If I'm going to say that Mount Everest is the highest mountain on Earth, that's knowledge of the world. And yes, you get that after experience, right? You do a bunch of measurements with all the mountains around the world. That's how you get to that knowledge. So that would be classified for Kant as synthetic a posteriori. Synthetic meaning it's knowledge of the world, and you get it from experience, right? After experience. Another example, there are more people in San Francisco than Milpitas. How do you know that? Well, you know it after you go and do your survey. So that's after experience, and that's actual knowledge of the world. If I said the ball is falling, that's knowledge of the world, and I get that after experience. So it's synthetic, a posteriori. If I tell you a bachelor is an unmarried male, or all bachelors are unmarried males, this is knowledge you can get prior to experience, right? So a priori. And it's knowledge that I get just by analyzing my sentence, just by analyzing the terms, right? So I'm not really learning anything about the world. I'm not really saying anything about the world. So analytic, a priori. Synthetic means of the world. It's knowledge that you put together of the world, right? Synthetic, you synthesize of the world. Analytic, you're not synthesizing anything. You're just analyzing your term. You're analyzing the word, right? So in all bachelors are unmarried, I'm just analyzing what the word bachelor means, and I'm telling you that they're all unmarried just by analyzing the word bachelor, right? In synthetic, I'm taking a ball, taking falling, and I put that together as I see it, right? I'm actually synthesizing some new information, putting together and making new information based upon my experience. Right, so that's what synthetic refers to. Okay. Another example, all triangles have 3 angles. It's a true statement, but it's a statement that you know through before experience, right? A priori, and I know it just by analyzing the definition of a triangle, right? So analytic, a priori. Do I have one more for you? Yeah. A red ball has color. Yes, it is true. A red ball has color, but I only know that by my analysis of the term red ball. So it's an analytic, a priori truth because I know it prior to experiencing it. And I'm just analyzing the term red ball. That's how I know it has color. I'm not really saying anything about the world. Yeah. Analytic is relations of ideas in Hume's terms. Synthetic is matter of fact in Hume's terms. Okay, so far, what we have is the dichotomy, right? Here is the battle between the rationalists and empiricists. The rationalists, right, will say that you actually can get knowledge a priori. But based upon Hume's fork, we see these 2 boxes that say, no, you can only get real knowledge through experience. And the knowledge you get through reason, that's not real knowledge. That's just knowledge we made up. That's not knowledge of the world. Compromise is with that 3rd box. He's going to say, no. We need reason to get knowledge. There are some things we can learn about the world just by thinking about it. First example, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Isn't that knowledge of the world? Isn't that knowledge of the world that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line? And you know that not through experimentation experience. You know that just by thinking about it. It just logically makes sense. The velocity of a body remains unchanged unless acted on by an outside force. So if you like shoot a Nerf gun and your Nerf bullet goes in the air, right? It should continue its velocity that it left your gun with unless some other force is acting upon it. So if there's no wind resistance, no gravity, that Nerf bullet should just go off indefinitely at the same velocity it left your gun, right? Doesn't that just make sense that the velocity of a body remains unchanged unless acted upon by an outside force? Just logically. Doesn't that make sense? The 3rd one, and the classic one, right? Every event has a cause. Doesn't that tell you about the world? As we've been talking about in class, I mean, science is based upon cause and effect. We're looking for causes. We're looking to see what causes some event. I mean, all of science is based upon that. But how do you know if cause and effect exists? Kant says you know it through thinking about it. It just makes rational sense. If we take a look at these synthetic a priori truths, Kant is going to make the argument that you can know about the world. You can know about the world just based upon thinking. And even more evidence now, in more recent times, if we take a look at something like Einstein and Einstein's equations that describe the nature of gravity and the nature of light and the nature of energy. Einstein came to those equations through reason, say rationalists. Einstein came to those equations by doing mathematics on a board, not by going out and experimenting with light. And he came up with these equations, and the math made sense to him, and it all logically fit. And when we take a look at his conclusions in the day, so for a lot of people, they didn't make sense. You know, gravity's not a force. There could be the existence of black holes. Time could be experienced differently by different people depending how you're moving. A lot of these things just didn't make sense to our experience. But the math led Einstein there, right? The rational thinking led Einstein to those conclusions. And what we see now is people doing experiments, because we have technology to do it, that go back and show Einstein was right just through reason alone. So now let's move on to his Copernican revolution. Both the empiricists and rationalists say they can get to absolute truths. Hume puts a little dent in that when he says science has truths, but they're always contingent upon experience. But still, though, both the empiricists and rationalists say, no, we can know something for sure about reality. Take a look at the debates. Take a look at the way people are acting now and protesting, you know, and have you seen what's happening in Arizona and Phoenix and debates online? People believe they have absolute truth. They have absolute knowledge, and they get worked up into a fervor about it. Well, here's Kant's revolutionary idea. He says, hey, look, the mind does not passively conform to its objects. Remember what the empiricists believe. Your mind is a blank slate. You look at the world, and then what you see goes to that blank slate, and then you know something, right? That's what knowledge is to the empiricists. Kant says, no. Your mind does not just sit there and knowledge just comes to it. Instead, the mind molds what you experience. The mind shapes what you see, what you hear. The phrasing in Kant's language is objects of consciousness, right? So what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, the objects of consciousness conform to the inherent a priori structures and categories of the mind itself. Everything you experience, the mind shapes it, molds it based upon the inherent categories of the mind. Meaning the mind is not a blank slate. The mind has categories that it places things in to make sense of the world. The two big ways that the mind structures and categorizes reality are through one, time, and two, space. So remember, the empiricists believe that knowledge just comes from the outside and then you get it. Locke says there are some things that we experience that are just the effects of the object in front of us, but there are some things that we experience that are direct properties of the object in front of us, like this cup is moving, or there's one cup here. Kant says no. Locke didn't go far enough. Everything we experience is shaped by the mind. Everything that we experience is not just the effect of the object, but is based upon how the mind works. And the way it works is it tries to make sense of its experience based upon time, putting things in time, and putting things in space. The big picture first, before we get into examples. Kant is going to make the claim that neither side can know noumena. Noumena means reality as it is, absolute truth. Rationalists and empiricists can't know noumena, can't know reality as it is. To get an idea of this Copernican revolution, let's take a look at some of the absolute truths that are known by rationalists and empiricists. So let's first take this truth that every event has a cause. Kant says, wait a minute. Think about this for a second. your understanding of cause and effects is dependent upon the idea of time. To say cause and effect exists means something happens prior to something else happening. So cause and effect, the belief in it, is dependent upon the idea of time, the existence of time. For most of us, we experience time going in a forward direction, right? We believe that time is continuously moving from the present to the future. Kant's theory is that that is a category of the mind. That human beings, just because of how our minds work, are imposing time upon our experience of reality. That time is not out there, time is in here. It's the way we make sense out of our experiences. We make sense of what we go through by internally putting it into past, present, future. Imagine possibly another sort of creature, another sort of consciousness. Couldn't it be possible that they experience time differently? And if they experience time differently, what does that mean for cause and effect? Cause and effect might not even exist. Kant's point then is that cause and effect isn't an objective truth. It's not a truth that is absolutely true of the universe, of reality. It's only true because we experience time linearly, going from the present to the future. That's a way that we shape and mold our experience. There was a movie, a sci-fi movie that came out like what, 5, 6 years ago, where alien creatures experience time differently than we do. You guys remember that film? Example 2. How about this belief, right, that the rationalists have, that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line? I mean, that's rational. That just seems true, right? Kant says, it seems true to us. But in order for that to be true, we have to understand things existing in space, right? Points, in this case, existing in space. But Kant is going to say space, arrival, very good, Minor. Space isn't something out there. Space is how we're experiencing things. So right now, you're probably sitting down someplace and you're looking at your computer. So, you say your computer's in front of you. And if you move your hand, there's like space between you and your computer. And then there might be another object, like maybe beside you, there's a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, or maybe beside you is a pencil or a pen or your notebook. And then, we have this idea that it all exists in space, right? Kant says, no. You have the stimuli that's coming to you through your senses, through your eyes, right? All this stimuli is coming to you. But in your mind, the way your mind makes sense out of that sensory experience is to say that these things exist in space. Your experience of space is something your mind is creating. Space is how you make sense out of your experience. Just like time is how we make sense of our experience. If we take a look at the whole idea of straightness, you take a ruler, put it on your piece of paper, and you draw your straight line, and you say, I see straightness. It looks like a straight line to me. The information, that light reflected off your page after you draw it, that information that goes to your eye does not give you information of a straight line. Your brain does not get information from your eye of a straight line, even though it seems like it to you. Why not? Because your eye is curved. The light that bounces to your eye gives you information of a curved line, which is why whenever you see movies, right, and they try to give you an image of like a person's perspective, they'll often curve the image. Have you noticed this? When they're trying to get you into the body of somebody, they'll sometimes curve the image of it to replicate the curvature of the eye. The information your eye gives to your brain is of a curved line because your eyeball is curved. Well, then how do you ever experience a straight line in your mind? It's because your mind is what shapes your experience of that reality. Your mind makes it so that you experience straightness because your mind is what makes you experience space in the first place, says Kant. Time and space are categories that your mind uses to make sense of what it's experiencing. Space is not out there. Space is what you are doing to your experience. Time is not out there. Your experience of time is what your mind is doing to your experience to make sense out of it all. What about these other empirical truths, right? What about me trusting my senses to see one cup or to see that it's still versus moving and all that sort of thing? Kant makes the point that all sense experience, all of it, is filtered and shaped by your mind. Not just color, not just smell, not just, no, all of it. The number of something, whether it's moving or not, it's all always shaped and experienced by your mind because those categories of mind are inherently within you. They're there to always shape what comes through your senses. Take a look at these two circles. Nobody cheat and measure them. Take a look at these two circles. I want you to tell me in the chat. If circle 1 looks bigger to you, type in 1. If circle 2 looks bigger to you, type in 2. If you think they're the same size without cheating, type in same. Okay, notice the results in the chat. Did you guys see that? Notice the results we have in the chat. A majority of us said 2, and a handful of us said the same. If you took a ruler out and measured it, number 2 is much larger than circle 1. Yet we had a handful of people here said the same. For the people that said the same, do you really think they look the same to you? Expectations, right? Your mind made you believe a certain thing about your experience. Take a look at the following image. Okay? We have several segments here. In particular, I want you to take, we have several segments here. Can anybody identify which segment is longest? Go ahead and type it in the chat without measuring, right? Without measuring. Just can you type in which segment is the longest? Oh, AC is right, but it's okay. So no AC. That's yeah, I should have left that out. That's not an option on my list here. Okay. If you were to take a ruler, right now and measured A to B, it should be the exact same length as B to C. But because of what's around those lengths, because of the way that they're framed, our mind made us see A to B as longer. I'm going to play you a video, and I want you to focus your attention on the green dot that's going to be in the middle of your screen. Now, as you stare at the green dot, right, as you focus on it, I want you to try to keep track too of how many yellow dots are around the periphery, but I want you to just focus on the green one in the middle. Okay, here we go. As you are focusing on the green dot, how many of you notice every once in a while a yellow dot disappear? Now, if we were to just focus on the yellow dots the entire time, what would you have noticed? You would have noticed that the yellow dots never disappeared. The yellow dots never went anywhere. So why did the yellow dots disappear when you're focused on the green dots? Because that's what your mind made you see. Your mind, says Kant, always shapes what you experience. Now, why is this important? Think about Locke's representational philosophy. I can't tell the color, right? Because the color is how it affects me, but I can tell there's one cup here, right? Kant says, no, you can't. At least absolutely, in terms of absolute truth, you can't determine that there's one cup here. Just like we couldn't determine if there's 1, 2, or 3 yellow dots there, because the mind always shapes your experience. If you got dizzy before, be careful. Have your barf bag ready. How many of you see things moving in front of you? Circles, rotating, etc. How do we type yes if you can see things moving? So both of these images can appear as if they're moving, and they both can appear as if they're still. But the image itself doesn't change. Remember Locke? We can tell this is moving, right? That's a primary quality. We can tell. Kant says, can you? Can you absolutely know for sure it's moving or not? No, he says, because your mind is continually shaping what you experience. If you think it's moving, it's because that's what your mind is shaping your experience for you to experience. That doesn't tell you about absolute reality. Okay, classic example. How many of us see the bunny rabbit in the image? How many of us see the duck first? Which one appears to you first? Notice that you could switch from one perception to the other, right? You can decide what to focus on. Like some of you decided to focus on a particular point and not see things moving. You can decide what to focus on here to see the rabbit versus the duck, but it is dependent on you. It is dependent upon your mind. How many of you can see a soccer ball here? Type in yes. Okay. What's the interesting thing about your perception of a soccer ball here? It's the mind, it's the lines. You assume that there is a ball there, that there is something holding all those shapes together. Where does that come from? That comes from your mind. Your mind is filling in the blanks. Your mind is trying to make sense out of its experience. This is Kant's big point. Your mind is not a passive observer, right? Remember the empiricist. You just open your eyes and then you get information and then you have knowledge. Your mind is just a blank slate. Kant says, no, 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 your mind is not a blank slate. Your mind has categories of space, categories of time. So whenever you experience something, your mind is shaping that experience. Like here, it's shaping it into a ball. Like before, it's shaping it into a rabbit or a duck. It's shaping it into a couple or a long-bearded man. It's shaping it into motion or stillness. It's your mind. It's your mind that shapes your experience of reality. So what does your mind see here first? What does your mind give you as a perception? You know, all I see is a nice furry dog that's interesting to pet. I have no idea where your mind is going, what's in your mind. But if you see anything else, that's coming from you. That is how your mind is shaping your experience. This is Kant's Copernican revolution. So all those truths we know from reason, right? All those synthetic a priori truths that the rationalists say, no, 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 this is truth of the world, cause and effect, shortest distance between 2 points, straight line. All of those truths are not absolutely true of reality. It's only true because that's how our mind works. All the truths we know from experience, right? One cup not moving, cup still. All of those truths, they're not absolutely true of reality, because our mind continually shapes and filters what we experience. All truths, all knowledge, says Kant, is the result of how our mind filters and shapes our experience. Therefore, our truths are never about absolute reality. Our truths are about how our mind best makes sense of reality. Our truths are about how our mind best makes sense of reality. Therefore, says Kant, we never know reality as it is, right? Noumena. We never know noumena. Is this why we sometimes get into ferocious disagreements? And the answer is yeah, right? We get oftentimes into ferocious disagreements because we have different perceptions of reality. I mean, literally, talk to somebody that's a supporter from, that's a rabid supporter of the left. Talk to somebody that's an extreme supporter of the right, and they're going to give you two different pictures of reality. So maybe you can get a sense here for what Kant's solution is, right? Therefore, says Kant, we can only know reality as shaped by our mind.